What's up, y'all? It's Wes Seiler here for the Breaking Conservative, and thank you so much for joining me tonight. For those that are watching live, for anybody who's watching this during the week, I hope it's going well for you. I hope you're having a great day. Um, we are about to head into the Memorial Day holiday here in 2021, and man, I just think it's going great where I'm living. You're having more and more people who are coming back to work, people that are going out shopping, people are starting to travel, people are starting to do lots of fun things. I took my kids to a water park last week, which was a lot of fun, just seeing people out and about. And, you know, at most people's workplaces, they don't really have to wear masks, especially if they've been vaccinated. So it's just great. It's great to see the economy coming back. It's great to see life coming back to normal. And, you know, with this holiday coming up, I think that there's going to be a lot of people who are, you know, just enjoying grilling and having some food and having a drink with some friends and stuff. And so as we kind of get back into a normal life, you know, we can kind of focus on more than just the day to day and some deeper themes. And that's kind of where we've been steering the show the past few weeks. Is we've been getting into some of the bigger topics and philosophic ideas that we don't always get a chance to talk about. I do want to go back to the previous episode that we did because we had several comments that came in after we were done going live, and I want to kind of answer those. I always love getting feedback on what we talk about. So last time we talked briefly, we talked about the permanent things, which is this concept from T.S. Eliot that Russell Kirk and others have, made more popular, or that they've explained in ways that people really appreciate. And we don't talk about that, since that's happened, since it's been, been included in a lot of works and things from the 80s and the 90s, etc. In more present day, we don't really talk about it as much, as even amongst conservative circles. So I was happy to get into that, and here's a couple of the comments. One was from William Smith, an old friend of mine, and William, if you get a chance to watch this one, I just want to say I appreciate your comment on this one. You said you enjoyed my perspective. It reminded you a bit of the hero with a thousand faces. So I'm not entirely familiar with that, but you gave me something that I can look at this weekend. So I'll take a look at that and kind of get back to you. I hadn't really been familiar with much of that before. So always good to have some good material to check into. And then looks like Camilo, hopefully I'm pronouncing that right. You had said that when I had talked about films, that was an interesting choice. And you were looking forward to watching me live. So I always love going back and forth with comments. So if there's ever something that you have a thought about, just post it here in the comments on Facebook, YouTube, or Twitter, whatever. And then I'll do my best to get to it before the show is over. We talked about films for a minute. I think this was the day after the show. And you said you wouldn't characterize the ones that I had brought up as conservative necessarily. So you wanted me to address how progressive conservative works of art each approach to permanent things. That might be interesting. And, I think it's important when we look at this that a work of art is rarely ever made, dedicated to progressivism or conservatism. I could think of like political films and things like that, where they're really trying to focus on an agenda. Occasionally you see more of like the worldview as like a center focus, but a lot of times people don't even think about the fact that they're dialing in to those type of worldviews when they make a film, because they're aiming at something different. They're just trying to tell a story that is impactful to them, or in the case of Avatar, a bunch of like blue aliens and making CGI look cool. I don't know. There's a story there too. But in so many different films, there's all kinds of other stuff going on. But we can look at it and we can say, look, even if the director and the writer and all that weren't really focused on conservatism as such, we can still see aspects of a story that are meaningful to us. And as conservatives, we can watch it and say, you know what, that aspect of it really, is an illustration of something we encounter in life, or that we think we should be doing more. So you look at like The Last Samurai, right? And what that guy encounters, Tom Cruise's character encounters, is, a culture that is trying to hold on to its roots and its heritage. And he actually falls in love with it and starts to try to preserve it himself. And so there's this conservatism that's part of The Last Samurai in the way that culture is important. And that scene that I showed a few episodes ago about honor is Tom Cruise was trying to work with the emperor to be able to say, hey, as this culture moves forward in Japan, how do you hold on to things that are very important to it? The same thing in Avatar, right? Like is that there's in this movie there's this alien race that's trying to hold on to nature and the spiritual energy that's part of this place, and yet there's human beings who recognize it. And so Journey Weaver and her character are trying to do this, and and yet the enemy is trying to cut it down. And there's this gray area as the characters try to work through, how do we preserve it? Can we do it? And you find yourself one side or the other, as you're watching the movie, from different perspectives. But it comes down to, how do we preserve what's good? So you can look at these films. I could go on. We could talk about The Matrix, but I love doing that because very few people have time, with how busy American life is, to read a bunch of books. But almost everybody spends time, a couple hours, watching a movie. So I love looking into films. I could do the same thing, and I could find progressive aspects in those films as well. So again, it's not as simple as that dynamic, but we do that all the time on our Conservatism on Tap show. We did it with Refounding Fathers. When we do that show, we'll bring up media. So it's a lot of fun to be able to kind of apply our concepts in that. And then just talking about the notion of permanence in life, the permanent things that T.S. Eliot has talked about, this aspect of nature that is fundamental and that really can't be obstructed or envisioned by man, is what we were talking about. And Nathan said, alas, life is impermanence. And I like that you bring that up, because from our perspective, life really is. I mean, we're on this earth for, and maybe for lucky 80 years to 100 years. We try to do some good, and then it's over. And so for us, life is impermanent. But I think, Nathan, what I was getting at is there's something more going on than just our lives. There's a bigger conversation that's happening, of which we are a part, but a small part. And there is a reality or an existence in which we find ourselves within its fabric that is bigger than us, and that has a sense of permanence, and that even when we're gone, we believe that there is this impact that's going to be made after we've left, right? For our kids and their kids, for society, hundreds of years from now, right? Is that there is this, arrow in time that is moving along, and what we do matters, for that future, the same way that people have gone before us have made a difference that we can enjoy. And it's a perfect segue to what I want to get into tonight. So thank you all for your comments. Nathan, we're going to kind of pick up where we left off as we get into this topic of what Memorial Day means. So, I mean, a lot of people know this, right? Like if you go on Wikipedia and you just look, you can see the results of what, the history of Memorial Day is. And I'll go through that really quickly, but I want to get more into, what does it mean, number one, for conservatives? And then two, what does it mean to me personally? Because it is a personal holiday for me, and something that I treasure every year. And then I look forward to being able to celebrate it, this coming weekend. So real quick, the basics, just in case you haven't heard this before, is that Memorial Day really, it's different than Veterans Day. It's different than 4th of July. It's for those who died serving, right? So people who were overseas, people who, were fighting. It could be domestically. Obviously, the holiday goes back to Civil War days, and so there was the domestic fight, and so many people died in that. But it's really anybody who died in the line of duty trying to defend our freedom, the United States, and did so and made the ultimate sacrifice. So what do you do on Memorial Day? Obviously, a lot of people just enjoy the time off from work, but the best way to celebrate it is by going to a memorial, going to a gravesite for soldiers, participating in any type of ceremony that honors those people. So if you're in D.C., they do a lot of things there. Here where I live in Florida, we're going to have a service with, some folks that have retired from the military talking about some of the experiences that they saw. You can spend time, if you know somebody, right, in your family tree, or a friend who knows somebody who passed away, sending them an encouraging note. Hey, we're still remembering that person and remembering the good stories. Those are all really good things to do for Memorial Day. So that's kind of the basics. But you think about what is the theme here for conservatives? The same way we're just talking about movies and applying conservatism to movies, apply it to this holiday and see what you can get. Because there's some beliefs, behind saying more than just thank you for your service, of actually reflecting and participating in a service or something like that, or a ceremony for those fallen, that requires some beliefs that could be considered conservative. For example, the notion that preservation of our rights requires sacrifice, right? I'm sure there are plenty of liberals who believe this, but conservatives tend to focus on it. You think about the philosophers like Burke, who are very conservative, and they were focused more on our responsibilities, our duties, the work that we need to do to be able to protect and preserve what is special, as opposed to, say, Rousseau, right? Rousseau being the philosopher that is commonly followed by the left, who believed that man was just born free and didn't have to do a whole lot if he could just return to his nature. The state of nature that he had would really be self-sufficient in many ways, and he, was against society as kind of corrupting and polluting that. It's very different than a lot of conservatives who kind of recognize the dangers and the fragility of life. And as conservatives, we look at the fact that some people have had to give up their freedom for others to enjoy it, and we believe they always will because of the presence, the existence of evil, that being fundamental to who human beings are. We're always going to have to confront that. And so when we take time during Memorial Day to think about the people who have gone before us, who have made those sacrifices, it's a great way to reflect on our freedom, our beliefs about freedom, and how we continue to preserve it in our society. But I want to get into my thoughts, and that's kind of like the rest of this episode. Is I'm thinking philosophically first of all before I get to personal, but philosophically, when we think about freedom, we think about sacrificing, we think about service. It just strikes me as someone who's participated in that service has changed, and I'll tell you what I mean by that. Is that I was having some cigars last week with a couple buddies of mine, and we were talking to this gentleman who had opened up this cigar shop, and I believe he was like in his 80s, maybe 70s, 80s, but he was talking about being a kid and serving in the military when he was very young and deploying over to Vietnam. And just the experience that he described was totally different than what I've experienced overseas in Afghanistan and other places when I deployed. Is like he talked about bullets being over his head almost every day. He talked about picking up AK-47s on the ground and shoving ammo in them and just continuing to fire. He talked about the conversations and the training that he went through and how they treated him and how they did all kinds of things that I just can't even imagine in our training today. And then what really struck me is he talked about having gone through all that. He actually at one point had thought he had been shot in the head and it had come very close to his helmet, and just being terrified but continuing to fight on and all those things. And some of that I can relate to in Afghanistan because we had some, threat there. We get rocketed and stuff like that. But he talked about it on a much more like in your face kind of level or consistent level, like it was a daily thing, which it wasn't quite that for us. And then he talked about coming home, and he talked about when he left the airport where he had been, he walked right into protesters who were spitting on him, who were accusing him of being a child killer when he wasn't, who were saying all these horrible things about who he was as a person because he had been drafted and served in the military overseas. And I just and I've heard that before, but listening to him describe it, and being where I'm at in life, I couldn't believe that that was the case because when I came home from Afghanistan, there was probably 40 or 50 people who were like cheering for our unit as we got off the plane in Baltimore. And there was all these people who were giving us food and even beer and everything else and hugging us and saying, thank you for what you've done. And I think about the fact that I didn't have to suffer through any of that backlash that he did. And when we think about Memorial Day, I think about the ultimate, price that people have paid. But I also think about everything in between, that many of these guys went through, right? So many difficult things that I don't have to deal with now, and those sacrifices along the way. And there are people who may have lived and survived through Vietnam, but they came back and they had PTSD, right? But it wasn't really a thing. It wasn't diagnosed back then the way it is now, and even now it's not perfectly diagnosed or understood. But at least it's kind of that term is common, and it wasn't 40 or 50 years ago. And so all these people who served their country but then had PTSD and then maybe died from it or had suicides or things like that, and just couldn't get the help that they needed back then because it wasn't as available as it is now. There's so much more to this than I guess is what I'm saying than what you'll hear, on typical news programs, and it's worth considering, where we are as a society. So sacrifice is only part of the story, right? It's only part of the story. Is that there's so much else going on with this, that these people, these challenges that they had to overcome. And yet, listening to this guy, this cigar shop owner, talk about it, he wasn't talking about it as if he was jealous, of people who serve today. He wasn't talking about it bitter of what he went through. He was just talking about, hey, that was my life, and it made me who I am today. It's a big part of my identity, and it was tough, but I made it through. And he was just a happy guy, and I've known many people like that. And you have to wonder why that is in spite of all of those difficulties, so many people were able to rise above it and do so much good. And you think about the people who aren't with us today, but they made choices, and they laid their lives down, or they made a conscious decision to fulfill the terms of the draft, right? And you can read letters, and so many of them were making this choice out of a sense of duty and bravery and valor. And I think that's worth celebrating, right? Is Memorial Day for me doesn't have to be just this sad, somber day. You can also look at, and it can be this celebration of their lives, of the courage that they have, of lives well lived. And that can make you kind of reflect on the nature of life and death, right? So going back to what I was saying before about sacrifice, is in many ways this was a calling for these guys. And yes, they did give up things, but they also gained things in the sense that because they made these decisions, they lived their lives well, and they stood for something. They had purpose, they had honor, they experienced glory in a sense. And so as I look at Memorial Day, I think I was thinking about another movie. I was thinking about Braveheart, and I know it's not a great representation of who William Wallace actually was, but this quote is in my head, that every man dies, but not every man lives, that Mel Gibson says in the film. And I think regardless of whether that's a accurate or inaccurate film, or whether William Wallace actually said that, it's still a great quote to think about, is everybody's going to have to encounter death at some point. The people that we honor on Memorial Day, by and large, are folks who stood for something, who found purpose, and they're worth imitating in the sense of what led them to those decisions. And then even people who didn't, or who didn't have to give the ultimate sacrifice, but they did encounter so many challenges and things that we don't even have to deal with today. It's worth honoring them too for the courage that they stood up for. So it doesn't have to be purely about death and being killed. It can also be about the greater narrative that led people to that. And that's Memorial Day for me. So that's what I'm thinking about. This as we come up on this holiday, I'm thinking about, what does it actually mean to live? And these people who've given everything for you to be able to live in this country, how are you using that on a daily basis? Are you using that to serve other people? Are you using that to be able to stand for something greater than yourself? Or are you kind of just drifting and living for your own self-interest? And as conservatives, yeah, I think it's upon us to be able to demonstrate what it means to live well. And I look forward to doing that in my life as best I can, teaching my kids that, being able to encourage my friends, and be able to be encouraged myself when I don't live up to my own ideals. But I'm curious what you think. Let me know how you're celebrating Memorial Day. Are you going to take a minute to kind of reflect on some of these themes? Are you going to a ceremony that somebody's having? Are you going to just take some time, maybe watch some films from wars that have gone by, and think about the people that they're trying to represent in those films? All kinds of really good ideas. I'd love to hear what you're doing, and if any of this kind of matters to you. Don't forget, as we kind of wrap up here, our YouTube channel. So you got all kinds of videos on there. You can see all of our past episodes. You can see the other shows that we do on the weekends. Don't forget Twitter, Instagram. We're on both. Our website is probably the best way to reach us. If you go on the BurkingConservative.com, you can send me an email at theburkingconservative@gmail.com. Be happy to address any topics that you like. And then just leave some comments on this video if you like. And what would you like to hear next? I always love to respond to those comments. So thanks everybody who watched this live. Thanks for the folks that are seeing this the next day or the day after that. And I'm looking forward to your thoughts. I hope you have a great rest of the week. And we'll see you on our Sunday shows where we'll be talking about some of these themes even more. So have a great